take a network break. I'm Drew Conry Murray.
I'm Jonna Johnson.
Help yourself to a virtual donut as we do our weekly dash through this week's tech news. Jonna, what do we have on the menu?
Well, we're going to be talking about whiplash in MITRE's CVE program and a bunch of news about Google, NVIDIA, AMD, and a whole lot more.
Yeah, it's a little bit chip heavy today, but there's other stuff in there too, so stick around. Before we get to the news, we're sponsored today by iTential. As your network automation practice evolves, so should your tools. Don't manage your collections of Ansible playbooks and Python scripts artisanally. Move up to iTential and load your automations onto a scalable platform your whole team can use. Visit iTential.com to find out more. That's iTential.com. And then stick around after the news. We have a sponsored Tech Bytes podcast. We talk about AI readiness with Broadcom. More specifically, we talk about getting your network infrastructure ready to support AI workloads. This isn't just a hardware or software issue, it's also a data issue. So we'll get some useful tips for AI readiness from our guest, Jeremy Rosbach. Before we get into the news, we have an FU listener wrote in to say, your recent network break show had a story about the history of Git. Git recently celebrated 20 years. He says, I was on the sidelines at OSDL when Git started. You missed the big motivation for Git. Andrew Trigel did a trivial reverse of the BitKeeper service. This caused a blowup, and Larry McVoy to cut off free BitKeeper usage for open source. This put Linus into a just fix the problem mode. So if you don't mind, I just want to tell a little story here and provide some context. So for many years, when Linus Torvalds was working on Linux, version control was basically Linus. And you can imagine that as the project grew, that became untenable. So eventually Linux adopted a source control software called BitKeeper, been created by a guy named Larry McVoy. However, many in the open source community started regarding the BitKeeper community license as needlessly restrictive. And essentially the license said the community could use BitKeeper for free as long as it didn't develop a competing product. In 2005, a Linux kernel developer named Andrew Trigel essentially reverse engineered BitKeeper, which upset McAvoy and generated some bad feelings in the community. And I think a story I read said after Linus tried to play Peacemaker for a time, he eventually said the hell with it, took a couple weeks off and went and wrote Git. The rest, they say, is history. I got all this from an excellent piece by Nicholas Yan. I've got a link to that full article in the show notes. It's a terrific read. And if you're interested in the history of Git, check it out. All right, moving on, we'll start with red alerts. First up, the CVE program itself kind of had a red alert. The program,
that makes it a meta red alert, right?
Yeah, it's a meta red alert. Yeah, we're getting meta here. The program was created by the MITRE Corporation, and then MITRE operates the National Cybersecurity FFRDC, which has been responsible since 1999 for developing, operating, and modernizing CVE and related systems. It's been funded by the government since 1999. At present, the Department of Homeland Security is the sole funder. On April 15th, an internal memo from MITRE was leaked. The memo warned that government funding was set to expire on the 16th. The cybersecurity industry reacted with alarm because the CVE program undergirds many essential InfoSec operations. Since that memo came out, two significant developments occurred. First, CISA, the U.S. Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, announced that it had found funding and would extend funding to MITRE to operate the CVE program for another 11 months. And then second, the board that actually runs the CVE program announced it was establishing the CVE Foundation. This is a nonprofit entity that would ensure the long-term viability, stability, and independence of the CVE program. There's not a lot of details yet on how this foundation is going to operate or where its funding is going to come from. But I think the idea is to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. Jonna, thoughts here? Because a lot happened.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. Depending on your political perspective, you're either going to say this is absolutely horrible and should never have occurred, or this is exactly what you want to have happen. And both points of view are actually reasonable. It is insane to just take a hatchet to the foundations of cybersecurity and be like, oh, let's just get rid of the CVE database because nobody needs to know anything about vulnerabilities. On the other hand, the outcome was exactly the desired outcome, which is let's get these guys off the government payroll and onto something that the industry creates and is self-supporting. So if you're an Elon Musk fan, you're going to read this and go, yay, because this is the right way to go, because you want this to not be government. I think the question of whether or not something like this should be funded by the U.S. government is above my pay grade. If you're outside the U.S., you may be quite happy at the idea that this will be handled by a not-for-profit, even if it's a U.S. not-for-profit, because that takes it further away from politics. But in any event, it certainly shook up the cybersecurity world, and quite a lot of people went, you people are insane. What are you doing?
Yes, it was a scary time. And we'll keep an eye on the CVE Foundation. I want to reach out to them and get more details, but I think it literally just it's been in the works, but they just set up a website very recently, put out that press release very recently, and that's the only thing that's up there at the moment. So we'll be digging into the foundation to get more details to find out how this is going to operate going forward.
Okay, and before we move into our next red alert, just an update on one of the last week's news items. It turns out that Chris Krebs, who is the head of intelligence at SentinelOne, as some of the news reports put it, fell on that grenade and resigned from SentinelOne. As we mentioned last week, all the security clearances for everyone at SentinelOne were revoked because Chris Krebs said publicly that the election had not been falsified in 2020. So in any event, he's gone. So the hope is that SentinelOne's folks will get their security clearances back. I will leave it to your imagination to think about whether that is a good outcome, a bad outcome, or somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think it just sort of speaks to Chris Krebs' character that he decided to resign from the company that was employing him to, he's essentially going to be dealing with some very difficult legal battles. Hopefully he's going to get some support from outside parties for this, but, tip of the hat to him for deciding not to drag Sentinel down one with him in this political fight.
Absolutely. And may all of us have that kind of courage in general.
Yeah, seriously.
Moving on to our red alert, Dpanel's hard-coded secret opens the package to takeovers. So last week, while the CVE database was still operational and continues to be, but it's kind of, we saw more.
We weren't sure.
We weren't sure. We saw more than 1,250 CVEs scoring a 10 out of 10 threat level. 924 new CVEs were created in the week ending 16 April, and 63,198 were updated, which is why we got the 1,250 scoring a full 10. So out of all of those, we picked out a CVSS 10 item, which is CVSS 2025-30206, which describes the vulnerability in Dpanel, which is a widely used Docker visualization panel and management system. Unfortunately, this service has a hard-coded JWT secret present in its default configuration, which means attackers can analyze the source code to retrieve the secret and use it to craft legitimate-looking JWT tokens. With those tokens, the attacker can impersonate privileged users or just bypass authentication. And one way or another, get complete admin access and so full control over the host machine. As you can see, that's kind of a problem.
Yes.
The problem is resolved in version 1.6.1, or folks could replace the hard-coded secret with a properly generated value and load it from secure configuration storage. Either way, if you are using Dpanel, you need to address this immediately.
Yeah, links in the show notes if you want more details. And it's another reminder why we need the CVE program.
Yes.
Moving into news, Google's making its Cloud WAN backbone available to enterprises and governments for WAN connectivity, including data center to data center, branch and edge connectivity, and cloud connectivity. That includes connecting to Google Cloud POPs as well as to third-party clouds such as AWS and Azure. In particular, offerings include cross-site interconnect that lets customers connect on-prem data centers to each other across the Google Cloud WAN with layer 2 connectivity at 10 or 100 gig options. It's also offering its premier tier network to serve as a cloud on-ramp from branch and edge locations to Google and third-party public clouds, SaaS apps, and the internet. Connection options include Google's Cloud VPN or third-party SD-WAN services. Google says this service is now available in 20 countries. John, I've got some thoughts here, but curious to get your take.
Well, I think one of the big ones is it makes logical sense for Google because they put this infrastructure in place. Now they're going to make money from it. My main concern, and I would push this out to any enterprise organization considering using this, is so far as we know, Google is actually not regulated in any way, shape, or form the way the actual telcos are. You may remember that the telcos actually are regulated against doing stuff like looking at your traffic. In fact, way back in the dark ages of the internet, they had trouble doing certain kinds of routing because they were concerned about what it meant to go look at TCP/IP addresses and things like that. Google is under no such constraints. So it depends on the degree to which you trust Google. I'm sure they're not doing this for nefarious purposes or reasons to look at your traffic, but nonetheless, it's worth noting that they're existing in an entirely separate category and are not really being regulated as a carrier. So if nothing else, if you are considering taking advantage of this and have built out an ROI analysis that says, yes, this will be cheaper than MPLS from AT&T or Verizon or BT or whoever your carrier is, do loop in your legal team briefly and say, hey, we do have this concern. Is it a valid concern? We're not lawyers. We don't play them on TV, but it's worth at least making sure that you've covered your bases because that's a potential risk that can come and bite you later.
Well, that's a great point. I wasn't aware of that. And in fact, Google is positioning this as a competitor to MPLS services, which you would get from a telco. And I think their pitch is, whether or not it's going to be cheaper, it's probably going to be easier to get the service stood up from Google than a traditional telco or service provider. But if there are regulatory issues that you need to be aware of, and I presume anyone sending traffic across the WAN is going to be using encryption anyway, but yeah, definitely a good point. You might want to get your legal department just to give you that check so it doesn't come back to bite you.
Yeah, and if they control the keys to the encryption, it doesn't really matter because, again, telcos, at least U.S. telcos, have been extremely diligent in not looking at the traffic that goes across their network because they've been, 50 years ago, they got punished for it, so they are not going to do it again. Google has never run into this, so one never knows. They may say they're not going to look at your traffic, but...
True, one never knows, yes. Just also to note, AWS also has a similar offering to this. They've had it for a while, so we'll have links in the show notes if you want to compare. But we'll move on, although we're stuck with Google, talking about Google running into issues. A U.S. federal judge has declared Google's ad network to be a monopoly in violation of U.S. antitrust laws. U.S. District Judge Leon Brinkma says Google is liable under 3 counts: monopolizing the publisher ad service market, monopolizing the ad exchange market, and tying together the company's publisher ad server and ad exchange. Next comes a penalty phase. The Associated Press says that penalty phase could start at the end of 2025 or early 2026. Google is going to appeal. Just to note, last year, Google was also ruled a monopoly in search. The U.S. Department of Justice, last we heard, wanted Google to divest its Chrome browser as a remedy. That case is ongoing. I think this case will also be ongoing, but a ruling is here, and now the legal process will proceed.
Yeah, and all I can think of here, Drew, is this is just another example of why the pace of technology and the pace of laws and regulations just are fundamentally mismatched, because all of this is happening right at the moment where, last week at our conference, Sam Altman stood up and said, oh, hey, we've completely displaced Google. I no longer Google anything. I just go in and ask AI. Now, personally, I don't do that, but that's because I'm not CEO of an AI company. But nonetheless, Google's search function is fundamentally under assault by various AI models, and they know it. And so exactly at the moment that they're getting threatened by emerging technology, suddenly that's when the legal apparatus gets up and says,
also catches up to them. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of a little bit day late and a dollar short, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay, and sticking with a sort of core networking theme, Cato Networks is adding shadow AI detection to its CASB services. Cato's SASE cloud platform features CASB functionality that can track employee access to applications and, in some cases, what they do when using those applications. Cato has now added to its feature set a shadow AI dashboard for seeing which AI applications employees are using on the internet, and also added functionality to its policy engine to allow organizations to enforce usage rules for sanctioned AI systems and put granular controls on which operations are allowed. Cato can also block access to unsanctioned AIs, and it currently claims that the system recognizes more than 950 Gen AI applications. That's kind of a lot. I think this is actually a great move, and I'm glad to highlight it. Good on Cato for announcing it. I think it's one of those things that you should be looking for in your zero trust or SASE solutions, because that's the kind of thing you really want to be able to control. I wouldn't count on it as a total comprehensive AI protection, but it's certainly a good first step. What are your thoughts, Drew?
I'm sure customers are asking for it. We hear enterprises being sort of wary about, sensitive information being accidentally leaked to, LLMs, publicly facing LLMs, where their data might get incorporated into it, and they don't want that. They're worried about leaks. I think we see this happen every time there's sort of a new major category of web available application, and the security industry always, runs and tries to catch up and provide some framework around you to set policies and controls. I feel very sorry for anyone having to add this to their list of policies they're trying to manage and monitor, but I can imagine folks also being like, yeah, we need to turn this on.
Yeah, I'm not sure why you'd feel sorry for them. I think that's sort of a no-brainer in this universe, right?
Well, just like, okay, so just thinking about the Shopify AI memo, where there's probably competing interests, like the CEO is like, we need to be all in on AI, but wait, not that AI, but this AI is okay, but I don't know if that AI is okay, and just, exceptions having to be made and policies getting very complicated as people figure out how to do all this.
Right. It's like people denying access to Amazon because they don't want employees shopping during work hours. And at the same time, you have to buy office supplies from Amazon or whatever.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair
So,
enough.
yeah.
I agree with that, but that's, that's a human issue. Maybe there's a solution that AI could provide for that.
It's AI all the way down.
Exactly.
Moving on, NVIDIA has announced that it will design and build factories to produce NVIDIA supercomputers entirely in the U.S. In a press release, the company stated, quote, together with leading manufacturing partners, the company has commissioned more than 1 million square feet of manufacturing space to build and test NVIDIA Blackwell chips in Arizona and AI supercomputers in Texas, end quote. More specifically, the company says it's building a supercomputer manufacturing plants in Texas with Foxconn and Wistron as partners, and that its NVIDIA Blackwell chips are already being manufactured at TSMC plants in the U.S. state of Arizona. NVIDIA anticipates it will produce up to $500 billion of AI infrastructure in the U.S. over the next 4 years. That's in partnership with folks like TSMC, Foxconn, Wistron, Amkor, and SPIL. So we're seeing, both the Biden administration and the Trump administration wanting to onshore, strategic manufacturing as much as possible here in the U.S. It seems like NVIDIA has gotten that memo.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's interesting is there's a report in Ars Technica that Blackwell chips may still need to be shipped to TSMC facilities in Taiwan, and that highlights something else. One of the more interesting conversations at the conference last week. This was the Vanderbilt Summit on risk and threats. Was that essentially supply chains for chips and everything else are the levers of power in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the questions becomes, forget tariffs and forget, costs of things. What are the risks with having supply chains that include loops outside the country or a country? So I think it's actually kind of interesting that those chips may still need to be shipped to the TSMC facilities in Taiwan. And it's also interesting that the reason is the technology isn't available in TSMC's U.S. facilities and may or may not be in the time frame noted.
Yeah, so Ars Technica is saying that some of those Blackwell chips will need advanced packaging, that technology isn't available yet in TSMC's U.S. facility. So you would still get, dinged with a tariff if the chip has to leave the country and then come back in.
And more importantly, the supply chain is not what you think it is.
Right. Well, there's also things, there's the basic raw inputs that all have to be considered, that they could also fall under tariff regime. So yeah, I feel like this is partly NVIDIA wanting to signal to the administration that it's trying to be a friend and a partner, and also just a reality of the United States in general is moving toward more sensitive onshore chip manufacturing. So NVIDIA is getting in line. The fact that it's also doing it with the partners, I think, may help them accelerate their ability to meet this as opposed to having to start from scratch.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very valid point. I'm glad you highlighted that, Drew.
Yeah. All right, a quick break to let you hear from our sponsor, iTential. If you're developing your network automation skill set, you've probably done some Ansible and Python work and maybe had some quick wins. But what if you want other people on your team to use those automations you built? And what if they aren't that familiar with Python or Ansible? You've run into the platform problem. You need a platform the whole team can use to run automations that just work. And this is the service iTential provides across their product portfolio. You can move your automations from your laptop into a repository and let iTential execute them in a scalable, secure way that abstracts details from people that you don't need to know while giving access to every nuance for those that do, like you. iTential puts you on the road to self-service network automation, allowing anyone to run your automations, all the while integrating with all the other systems your organization runs. To find out more about iTential's products and how they help you build an automation platform, visit itential.com, and you can test drive iTential free for 30 days. Just go to itential.com. All right, in other chip news, AMD says its forthcoming processor, codenamed Venice, has been, quote, taped out and brought up to the TSMC advanced 2-nanometer process technology. AMD says this is the first high-performance computing chip to achieve this milestone. TSMC's 2-nanometer process promises reduced power consumption and increased transistor density compared to its 3-nanometer process. AMD is expecting this Venice chip to launch sometime next year.
I just think it's pretty cool stuff. They're on track. And yes, always interesting to see Moore's Law in action.
Yeah, I think I probably also should note, to my understanding, that 2-nanometer process not available in the U.S. Also.
Correct. So. those are all the next generation processes, although I believe Intel is at work on that. But again, that's some years out. Yeah,
I think Intel is calling it 18A. That's their 18A process, which should get them to similar power and transistor densities as TSMC's 2-nanometer, but 18A is still also a work in progress.
Exactly. So that's still a couple years out here in the US.
Yeah.
Coming back to network and security, core network and security capabilities, the company AtSign is bringing zero trust to RDP. AtSign is a company that makes an open source platform for developing applications and services that, in its words, prioritize security, privacy, and data control. The company has released a remote desktop protocol server built around its no-ports technology. RDP servers, as you may know, are a frequent target for outside attackers because they're still common and because they have to expose network ports to the internet to allow connections. However, instead of having an open port that responds to connection attempts even by unknown entities, AtSign's invisible RDP requires cryptographic authentication of identity in order to communicate at all. Any connection attempt not prefaced with a valid identifier is ignored, rendering the RDP server effectively invisible to unauthenticated parties. This is similar to the way other software-defined perimeter or zero-trust networking products such as AppGate SDP work. Highlights, there's notes in the show notes. I would say this is a pretty cool company, and it's taking a very interesting approach to security. It's a good way, as noted, to implement zero trust in certain capabilities. Your thoughts, Drew?
Yeah, I'm happy to see advances, particularly for things like RDP that can potentially expose you to risks. So anything we can do to lock them down, it sounds good to me. I think folks who are working with RDP should probably look at this.
Exactly. And continuing on the security theme here, the SSL TLS certificates are getting hugely reduced lifespans. So if any of your apps, which they probably do, are using these certificates, note that the CA Browser Forum, a group of certificate authorities and browser and other software developers, have voted unanimously to chop the lifespan of SSL TLS certificates from the current 398 days, over a year, down to a mere 47 days, less than 2 months. The most prominent use of these certificates, of course, is in HTTPS, the protocol meant to secure web transactions from spying and interception. Apple was the one that initially proposed reducing cert lifespans. Google's Chrome team, the Mozilla organization, and Sectigo in support. The approved proposal calls for reducing lifespans gradually over the course of the next 4 years. 200 days in 2026, 100 days in 2027, and 47 days by March of 2029. The goal of the change is to reduce the risks from outdated certs and deprecated cryptography methods, as well as from compromised credentials. Also, there's sort of an ancillary hope that the short lifespans will get both users and developers to more fully embrace automated renewal and rotations tools, which I think is the solution in the long term.
For sure. This is not something you want to be doing by hand. I was glad to hear that this has a timeline to it. It's not, we're just chopping it to 47 days next week.
Tomorrow.
You've got some time here to get ready because this kind of thing does take a lot of time. It has to carry across an entire industry. Lots of processes have to be involved. So, but I guess this is your warning to if you are not already automating certificate management lifecycle, this is something to look into.
That's exactly it. I mean, the call to action here for listeners is now is the time to include automated renewal and rotation tools in your strategic plan if you have not already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Go check out Let's Encrypt if you're looking for a place to start. Okay, a couple of financial results before we close. First, Taiwanese chip manufacturer TSMC announced Q1 2025 financial results. For the quarter, the company earned 839 billion new Taiwanese dollars, or approximately 25 billion US dollars. Revenues were up 41% for the quarter. It had a net income of 361 billion new Taiwanese dollars. That was up 60% over this time last year. So great quarter for TSMC. They're also forecasting a strong Q2, but note that they quote, uncertainties and risks from the potential impact from tariff policies exist, end quote. So yes, trying to predict Q2 is probably a fool's game.
Absolutely. And that's unsurprising, I guess, is the way I would put it.
Yeah. And just for context, TSMC currently faces the 10% base tariff from the U.S. that could rise to 32% if the 90-day pause from the Trump administration's reciprocal tariffs are lifted, or if they decide to carve out semiconductor industry. But again, not known. So in other semiconductor-related results, the Dutch company ASML announced its Q1 results, and ASML makes the high-end lithography machines that etch patterns onto silicon wafers for computer chips, essentially the machines that make chips. For Q1, the company earned 7.7 billion euros, up 45% year over year, with a net income of 2.4 billion euros. Bookings, however, were below market consensus, likely due to tariff uncertainty among ASML's customers. The company says AI should continue to drive growth for the company, but, quote, the recent tariff announcements have increased uncertainty in the macro environment, and the situation will remain dynamic for a while. And I'm just doing my forecasting here for all of the financial results we report on over the next few months. We're probably going to hear tariff uncertainty as a caveat going forward. Thoughts, Jana?
I would say I pretty much just agree with your assessment there. And yeah, particularly the part about tariff uncertainty, and of course the market hates uncertainty.
It does, but they got to deal with the whack of it. All right, that wraps up the news. Jana, where can folks get more from you online or find it? You mentioned an event you were at. What is that? What was that event?
Oh, that's our Nemertes Next conference. We do them twice a year. The next one is in October in New York. Go hit up our website. You'll see details. It's Nemertes Next, N-E-X-T. The website is, of course, nemertes.com. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn. A number of you have. I'm always happy to see people who say, hey, I follow you on Network Break or Heavy Strategy, our other podcast. Love to meet up with you there. I'm Drew Conry-Murray. I'm on Blue Sky at DrewCM. I'm blogging at packetpushers.net. You can also find me on LinkedIn and as well as the Packet Pushers Slack. And if you have follow-up like we got today, hit us up, packetpushers.net/FU. We do love to hear from you if you've got a comment, a correction, a query, or anything else. Stay tuned for our Tech Bytes conversation with Broadcom on prepping your infrastructure for AI. It's coming right up. Today on the Tech Bytes podcast, we're talking AI readiness with sponsor Broadcom. And more specifically, we're going to talk about getting your network infrastructure ready to support AI workloads. And this isn't just about a hardware or software issues, it's also about data. So we're going to get some tips and tricks with our guest, Jeremy Rosbach. Jeremy is Chief Technical Evangelist and Lead Product Marketing Manager at Broadcom. Jeremy, welcome back to the podcast. And so what should folks be thinking about if they're thinking getting their own AI infrastructure ready for AI?
Yeah. Thank you again. And listen, everyone's talking AI. It's the big hype right now. While we may not see a lot of production or innovation around what's happening inside of our networks immediately, that doesn't mean that we can't start getting and continue building resilient networks to support what will be a tsunami of activity in the enterprise network space as well as telecoms. For example, public data out there, Meta has definitely talked about how much time their AI workloads spend on their network. And I'm looking at a chart here, 57% of time is spent of their AI workloads on their network. So obviously that means we have to continue building resilient networks for these AI workloads to get what they demand from network performance, which is near perfect network performance, near to zero latency, limited to zero packet loss, high bandwidth, you name it. I'm sure this all makes sense to your audience. And I have 10 ways that we have continually at Broadcom talked about how to build network resiliency. It doesn't change just because we're talking about AI. It's the way you build resilient networks for what will be a big impact that AI is going to bring us.
I want to dig into something you said, which was you need to essentially have a perfect network. And for a lot of folks listening, they're like, yeah, not going to happen. So what do you mean by that? And why do I need that?
Yeah, for example, nothing's going to be perfect, near perfect, real-time, near real-time performance data collected. For example, I'm trying to do a side podcast with a buddy of mine. I went on to ChatGPT and I said, give me some cover art for the podcast. And, I input some parameters. Give me two guys sitting on a sofa wearing sunglasses and a hoodie. They're going to talk about mental health. And it produced, one guy had 8 fingers on his hand and the other guy looked like he went through the window of a car during a car accident. It's about the data. It's about what we're doing with the data. It's about where we're collecting the data. It's how we're collecting it and what we do with it to train the AI engines to deliver the workloads where it needs to be delivered and deliver the outcomes we expect. And from a network perspective, especially a network observability perspective, as NetOps is always the crucial aspect to any good running network, I can dive into the 10 ways that we suggest to build any network resiliency, whether you're talking about implementing SD-WAN or we're talking about whatever is going to come with AI workloads. So you want to jump right into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, listen. The first one is no surprise to anybody. Many of the customers that I speak to still continually deal with noise on their network. And when I mean noise, I mean there's a network needle in a haystack they constantly have to look through when troubleshooting. So, Cisco ACI can produce 20, not throwing them under the bus, but they can produce 23,000 events and alarms. And if not correlated and suppressed, and root cause isn't delivered and breadcrumbs aren't delivered to network operations, they're going to spend hours in triage and troubleshooting. So fault isolation, alarm suppression, these are the keys to any resilient network and resilient network operations, being able to suppress a lot of the events that may come in because one device went down and all the devices behind it obviously are going to be down. Delivering minimal breadcrumbs to the root cause is good for any network operations teams to build good resiliency. I did mention number 2 is alarm noise reduction. So when you are suppressing events, downstream events that don't need to be looked at from a triage perspective, just that one root cause, one device can produce a lot of alarms. So events correlate up to alarms correlate up to root cause. So being able to suppress the alarms that get triggered from all those events that are occurring. So network operations has one place to look, one alarm with all the data that was collected about that alarm. So topology, events, telemetry, logs, faults, you name it, flow. In one alarm, you have everything you need to know about the device that is the root cause at hand. So troubleshooting is within 1 or 2 clicks away. Again, these are just foundations of any good network operations team.
So for example, Jeremy, in that scenario, if you have a physical link go down and you lose a routing adjacency, and then you have a routing table convergence event, et cetera. There could be a whole bunch of logs and noise and so on. But what you really care about is the line went down. All the rest of those alarms and log events, you want categorized under that one main event. So you're not bombarded with all these things that appear to be separate. You want them all clustered together.
Well, even clustered, but then suppressed. So just tell me the one thing I need to worry about, because we're talking AI here, right? So your AI engines is only going to be as smart as the data you're feeding it. So like you said, if we're feeding it 23,000 events from a software-defined solution, it doesn't need to know about all of those, back events or the events that are happening behind the root cause. It just needs to know about the root cause. And that's how you have to feed these AI engines to be as smart as possible. And that's done through network observability. So you're right.
So, the point you're making here, and I think this is an important one, you're talking about what events to feed to AI that is feeding back to you root cause?
Yeah. And listen, like any new AI observability solution out there, there's one called Selector AI. I think we all know it. It's doing amazing things, but it's dependent on the customer's ecosystem. And that means the customers of their observability, their NOC operations. How are they observing their network and collecting that data and then feeding it up to the AI engine? So we don't garbage in, garbage out. So you're exactly right. But it's based on the customer's ecosystem and how they're monitoring and managing their network. And that's how you get a smart AI engine telling you where the root cause is and what to worry about.
So what's point 3?
Point 3 is leading into root cause analysis, and I briefly mentioned it, but the minimum breadcrumbs that a network observability solution can collect and then feed to the AI engine is very important, because when I walk into a data center in the morning and I'm the level 1 NOC operator, I want to be able to say, hey, just grabbed my cup of coffee. Where do I need to focus my attention today? And again, if the customer's ecosystem, their network observability solution, is feeding the right data, that it's collected and normalized and cleaned and suppressed if need be, and it's fed the right data about that device that's having issues, whether the root cause was found in the log, whether the root cause was a performance issue, a CPU on the ESX server, you name it, and suppressed everything else about that device that seems to be okay, then the AI engine is going to be able to say, listen, I'm seeing packet loss on this router in Seattle, and I've also seen 3 tickets come in for the help desk about Seattle poor performance. You should probably focus your attention there. And it's just going to give the level 1 NOC operator the data that it's been fed from a resilient network observability solution to have that 1 or 2 breadcrumbs to find the root cause. As I move on, number 4 is now we've collected a lot of good data from every aspect of the network, logs, fault performance, flows, telemetry, you name it. What can we do with that data? Because the more we do with the data and then feed it to the AI engine, the less it has to do and give us the answers that we need as quickly as possible. So obviously we want to baseline and start adding thresholds to that data. So listen, I've seen this router performance out of this interface 01 at 50% for the most of the last few months, but I see it slowly. It's also telling me it's slowly going up 55%, 60% over the last couple of weeks. So we need to watch that, and then obviously set a threshold, say 80%. If it hits above 80%, notify someone. This is how we not only make our NOC smarter, and we also allow the AI engine to be able to be as smart as possible by feeding it. Listen, in 2 weeks, if it hits this threshold, do something. Provision more memory, provision failover to this other backup link, whatever the case may be. But the fact is that we have good data now. We can do something smart with it. And the AI engine, like I said, is only going to be as smart as the data we feed it. So let's provide it smart, analyzed, and predictive data. And that's what we're talking about here.
It's interesting to me that you're talking about sculpting that data, or maybe adding some metadata around what we're feeding into AI. It's easy when you don't work with AI, it's easy to think of it as, I'm just going to throw a bunch of data at it and it'll know what to do, right? That's sort of the magic. But in fact, there's a bunch of massaging that you can do to improve the results you get.
Thank you for saying that. Yes. I mean, AI is not going to be the end all be all to all of our problems, especially in the network space. It's not. It's only as smart as we train it to be. And you train it with a customer's ecosystem of a very powerful and resilient network operations and network observability practice. As I move to number 5, listen, we still, and forgive the expression, I'm a guy that ran data centers in the 90s and 2000s, but we still fat finger router and switch configs. I brought down many a router in my day because I thought I could do some work from home, and then I locked myself out, and you know how that goes. You got to drive into the office. We still bring down huge telecommunication networks for entire coasts of the United States and abroad when we manually misconfigure a device. So configuration compliance and automated rollback is so important, because if you're training the AI engine to understand to look for configuration changes according to compliance regulations within your company, and if the AI engine is smart enough to understand that there is an automated rollback procedure, it can kick that off for you, or at least it can immediately tell you a configuration change has been made and I recommend you roll back to this dated config. These recommendations, some people may say, well, I would have known that already. Well, this is just one of many, many use cases that can be applied to massaging the data for an AI engine to be smart. And listen, we are still fat fingering configs, so we need some help. It's one of the top 5 ways networks still go down today.
So are you talking about sort of setting up a system where either a human or some kind of AI system looks at changes before they get rolled out to do like a pre-check?
I mean, it could do that according to compliance rules. Listen, you haven't met the compliance rules for making this change yet, or some people, small organizations may not have all those compliance rules in place, and they make a change, but the AI engine is smart enough because the network observability practice is smart enough to feed that data to the AI engine, and the AI engine will say a change has been made, and I'm going to roll it back to this because that's the rule you set, or I recommend rolling it back to this.
Got it. So there's that notion of either an automated action or at least a more informed alert about what you should do next.
Yeah, I mean, and I know it sounds elementary, like, duh, I've been bringing down networks for 3 decades now, and duh, I should know not to put a config change in the middle of the day, but it's happening. It's still happening, so we need a little bit of help. Number 6 is, listen, it's great to visualize everything that you're seeing across the network. Nobody wants to look through a log. Nobody wants to do packet captures and be the guru of how to understand everything inside of a packet. You want to be able to visualize. So topology analytics, we've seen topology for a long time, but it's great just to be able to see what's connected to this, what's connected to that, but the analytics that can be applied to the topology, so you can actually triage in the topology where you click on a device, it gives you everything it knows about that device, again, from the data it's collected, from logs, fault performance flows, telemetry, whatever the case may be. And to be able to triage visually is a beautiful thing now. I mean, we're all visual now, and we have a 3-second attention span. So if I can see that a SD-WAN tunnel that's encrypted is red and not green, and the device it's connected to on the edge of the network is orange, I know right away to go there. And maybe the AI engine, when you've fed it the right data and trained it, will be able to either fix that issue or visually represent where the problem is. When you ask it, where should I focus my attention today? It can visually show you what's happening, and right click and say, it'll tell you, do you want me to do this? You want me to roll back that? Or you can obviously do a manual rollback or a manual fix. But visually, I mean, how long would it take to just search for that network needle in a haystack, which people still do today? So visualizing what the network looks like and how to fix it is always good for an AI engine to learn and grow.
But that also ties back into this notion of robust network observability, because you can't be operating from, a static diagram that was made who knows how many months or years ago and is way out of date. This guy has to be like real-time or near real-time telemetry and updates that make sure that topology is actually correct.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, listen, I miss the days of Visio. I really do. But those days are long gone, and static is not dynamic anymore. I agree with you. Yeah, great point. Thank you. Number 7 is now taking all these great recommendations and all the great data that we're collecting inside of our networks and expanding it outside of the networks we own to the unmanaged networks. So listen, you may say there's no way in hell tons of AI workloads are going to be going outside of the 4 walls of the data center. There's not enough capacity. You can't depend on the ISP networks. I agree, but it's happening. I recently, on my podcast, the NetOps Expert, I recently interviewed the CEO of an AI company called Alfie. And what they do is that they put all of their AI engines in the cloud, and the customers, as they're writing their emails, more for government compliance, writing papers, et cetera, the AI engine is looking at what they're writing in real time and making sure it's not derogatory, it's not using bad words, it's compliant in the way it's written, and it's compliant in the way it's going to be read from the consumer. And it meets all the standards that government agency or so wants to meet when they put anything publicly out. That's done over the internet. It's looking at real time what you're writing and changing or making the recommendations to stay compliant. So if your internet sucks, like mine does right now in Phoenix over Wi-Fi, it may miss what you're writing, or a blip can be catastrophic if it doesn't catch something that you're doing in real time and it goes out to the public. So AI will be running over unmanaged networks depending on the use case. And that's why expanding your network observability, what you're doing so well inside the 4 walls of the data center, out to ISP networks, out to cloud provider networks, to not only quickly get network innocence and blame them. Listen, this device with this IP address is dropping packets above my 10% threshold. Do something about it. I mean, this is how you gain that visibility into these unmanaged networks without having to be a god of those networks. All right, number 8, as we start to round out the top 10 ways to get your networks ready for AI workloads. Now that you've gained visibility into these unmanaged networks across ISP and cloud, where a lot of AI workloads may be running or transferring data, get that real-time granular insight into how those networks are performing in ISPs and clouds. So understanding end-to-end, hop-by-hop network path analysis. So again, the Alfie situation. If I'm writing an email and my company is using this AI engine to monitor what I'm writing, if I'm writing a white paper, it's monitoring what I'm writing and staying in compliance with its regulations. What does that entire network path look like from my place in Phoenix out to Google Cloud, where the AI engine is? Because if a blip occurs, if I'm writing this and the AI engine seems frozen or something as I'm writing it, and I depend on what it's recommending to me, I'm going to go to IT and say, what the hell's happening? I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's Google. They're going to want to see a hop-by-hop network path analysis from my workstation on my home network to the residential ISP that I'm using here in Phoenix, all the way out to Google Cloud and the other transit networks and backhaul networks that are involved in that entire network path, to isolate the issue, find their innocence if they can, and get the ISP to fix it right away.
So that means things like, I guess, digital experience monitoring, where I have the capability to check performance even on networks I don't own and can't instrument, using things like synthetic transactions.
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful segue into my number 9. Yes. And it's the digital experience. It's a lot of tag names out there. I like to say it's, analyzing the network experience, of the entire network path, whether you own it or not. And another way, now that we can see, I mean, we have to be able to observe, we have to visualize what the network experience is doing or using, what networks it's using. Now that we visualized it from end to end and every hop in between, let's start using synthetic testing out there. All the industry analysts are recommending synthetic testing is a great way to be able to assure networks that you're using, but don't manage for that experience. So synthetic testing across that entire network path, whether you own it or not. A wonderful example, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, one of our customers, their company implemented a new SD-WAN solution, but didn't tell the NOC. You know how that goes on SD-WAN architects, the NOC, and then they just threw it over the wall. And then people were complaining it wasn't working. And they found out that the core switch that was all the data was running through, one of the ports was set to half duplex. So, being able to synthetically test, synthetically test what that end-to-end network experience would be across that new SD-WAN and finding the issue before we throw it over the wall in production is so powerful, not only inside the four walls of the data center, but the fact that we're using mostly public networks today to get our job done.
So take us home to number 10.
Yes, and finally, number 10, now that we have seen the entire network path, mostly public networks for most of the network delivery experiences that we're delivering, obviously that means we're feeding all this great data to the AI engine that it's never had before, that we've never had before because we couldn't see into ISP and cloud provider networks. We're going to active testing. So there was synthetic testing, synthetically mimicking user information or user data across these networks to see how the network performed. Now actively testing in real time. So if a threshold is breached on a device, say in Verizon Fios's network or Google Cloud's network, and you can set these thresholds, the network observability or the AI engine is smart enough to now say, hey, network observability solution, test this link, this entire network path from this region. Send some more packets, obviously really, really small packets, and let's verify we know what we're talking about. Let's verify the breadcrumbs that we're gathering. Let's verify that we know before we blame this ISP that it is their issue on this device with this granular packet loss information. Because without any of these abilities, without any of these capabilities from a customer's ecosystem, its network observability solution, the AI engine isn't going to do squat. It's going to do what you tell it to do and what you train it to do. And if you have a robust ecosystem of observability and visualization of your networks, your AI engine is going to deliver the outputs or even provide the outputs or do the automation for you because you're providing it reliable data that you've collected, you've cleaned, and you've normalized and you analyzed. Who's to say we need AI right now for networks because we're doing all the work ourselves? But listen, I know, I talk to customers, there's IT shortages out there, which I can't believe, but there are IT shortages out there of network experts. A lot of graduates, they're going into AI, they're going into cloud, they're going into, mobile app production. Nobody thinks about the network or even going into it as a profession because the network's always there, and when it isn't is when you think about it. There is an IT staff shortage. So we will need analytic, automated AI solutions that just help us get to the root cause quickly or help us do mundane tasks quickly. The use cases we're talking about in networks today are not this grandiose thing. They're enriching a troubleshooting ticket with great data you've collected. It is escalating a ticket with an AI engine to escalate it to the architects because the breadcrumbs show it's an SD-WAN issue. We'll get to the bigger use cases down the road. Right now, let's get to the low-hanging fruit, and AI can help us because you can collect the right data to make it as smart as possible.
So, Jeremy, you went very quickly through those 10 tips. Is there a place where folks can maybe take a little bit of time and sit with them and digest them?
Yeah, so I definitely went through them quickly, and I wrote an ebook about all of this. Is your network really ready for AI? The 10 ways to future-proof today's network infrastructure for tomorrow's AI workloads. And you can check out that link and download the ebook in the show notes. And always hit me up. It's jeremy.rossback@broadcom.com. Happy to talk. If you have any great stories, please join me. Sorry, guys, I'm going to plug my podcast here, but please join me and tell me about your stories on the NetOps Expert. Happy to showcase them as well.
All right, so that is the Is Your Network Really Ready for AI ebook. It's available for free. We'll have the link in the show notes if you want to get that, or you can just do a search on the internet for it. And of course, the NetApps Expert podcast with Jeremy. We welcome all podcasters here, Jeremy, no worries. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to Broadcom for being a sponsor. And thanks to you for being a listener. You can find this and many more fine free technical podcasts and our community blog, plus much, much more at packetpushers.net. You can follow us on LinkedIn, hear us on Spotify, and if you would, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.